Today's episode is brought to you by Trucking Hub. Now listen, if you're still bouncing between 5 different logins just to run your trucking business, you're already behind. Trucking Hub is built by a carrier for carriers, and it puts everything under one roof, whether it be dispatch, safety, maintenance, and even accountant and a driver app. Their dispatch runs on PC Miler and Copilot navigation, so the miles are right the first time. Now the ELD is FMCSA certified, tamper-proof, and trusted since 2017. And if you want to keep it all in one lane, you can even roll in company phones, texting, video, and fax backed by nationwide LTE. Bottom line, this is the kind of system that's you spend less time hopping and more time hauling. Plans start at just $29 per truck, no contracts, no hidden fees, and you can try it for free for 30 days. Check them out at their website and get your time back. Welcome to The Long Haul, the podcast dedicated to empowering small carriers and owner-operators to drive their business forward. I'm your host, Adam Wingfield, bringing you insights from industry leaders, real-world success stories, and strategies to help you navigate the road to profitability. Whether you're just getting started or looking to take your fleet to the next level, this is the show where trucking meets opportunity. So buckle up, it's time to go the distance. Welcome back to The Long Haul, the podcast where small carriers and owner-operators get the truth without any of the fluff. I'm Adam, and today I've got a special co-host in the booth with me, my good friend and freight powerhouse media, Kaylee Nix.
It's an honor to be here, Adam. We got a good one lined up for today.
We got a good one. We're just switching it up a little bit today, though. This is kind of like a third and long type of episode. No polished agenda, no fluff, just me and Kaylee breaking down some heavy headlines, and just really trying to have some conversations about something that's really, really important and happened and it's going on. So we want to react to some driver frustrations, having the kind of conversation you was having more often in the industry. And I'm just super excited to get started. But do me a favor, make sure you like, share, and subscribe wherever you're listening to. And don't forget to sign up for our weekly newsletter over at the FreightWaves Playbook to stay on top of the market and the things that are changing ahead of it. Well, let's get going, Kaylee.
Yeah, we'll just start right off the top, right? We're about a week and a half into September right now. Things are still just so uncertain across basically everywhere in the freight industry. And I think everybody was coming out of the month of July into the month of August with a little bit of hope that did not materialize. And the driver market in particular has still continued to suffer. What did the month of August really feel like for these drivers?
A little bit like the month of July, a little bit like the month of June, a little bit like the month of May.
A little bit like the last 18, 20, 24 months have been for them.
And you know, the thing is that what they haven't seen and what the driver marketplace hasn't seen is any relief. And with tariffs taking the place that they're doing, with the capacity sitting where it's still sitting, it's still stagnant, we're not really seeing anything that's going to drive any changes for that. We had a little seasonal lift around Labor Day, which is typical seasonality, but it wasn't much. It was just kind of just like a quick little stab, but then everything got back to normal really, really quickly.
Yeah, life in Sonar has not been great. The data has not been fantastic, and we see that continuously if you look through the platform. The only good thing that's happened in Sonar in the last 18 months is that we've released Blue to Blue, which is great news for our driver community. They can be really excited about that. It's easy data now for them. But overall, the data itself, not really promising, not super great. We've got a screenshot here of our IOTI, our Inbound Ocean Container Index here, and it's not great. Adam, talk me through this a little bit. It seems like every time that we get new news about tariffs, we see this drop and then a little peak and then a big drop once again. And now going into the fall, which we should be headed into peak season, again, not very hopeful.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. The one thing that you're seeing on your screen, and most importantly to understand, is with the inbound ocean TEUs, it really gives you a kind of a crystal ball as far as volume is concerned and what's happening over the next 4 to 6 weeks out, because this is what it takes for the containers to get on shore, they get transloaded onto dry van trailers or reefer or whatever, and it allows it to be dispersed throughout the country. But as you can see on your chart, and we ran this in a couple of our small carrier market updates that we do every single week on Tuesdays, what you're seeing on your chart is a constant decline in overall ocean inbound volume. It starts in July, because if you remember, between May and July, we had a pretty good surge. That was a lot of that hey, we want to get ahead of those tariffs. We call it front loading. You saw a lot of that front loading activity go up until right around July 4th. And man, it's dropped off like a rock since then. I mean, look at those volumes as we see them. And those peaks and valleys are just indication of the volatility that's been happening inside the ocean marketplace. And really that's kind of just spelling news all the way across the globe because it's affecting everybody.
And then, of course, the question becomes, okay, what does this mean for our community, for the people who care about it, for the drivers? It's a ripple effect, right? It's the downstream effects of the reduction in imports coming into the U.S. We said it before, we ain't got no money. Americans have no money to spend right now. We're not going to be spending on these discretionary goods like we have been in the past. That means that we're not going to need nearly as much inventory coming into our spaces. A lot of inventory has been front-loaded, like you mentioned. That means that what drivers want, those rates to come back up, is not necessarily going to happen. And I want to pull up the National Truckload Index because that is kind of our snapshot of where rates are at right now. Again, not been kind to the driver community. It's been kind of this peaks and valleys. It looks like there's a little bit of a steady incline from our 7-day average, but we're still not where we need to be.
No, if you look at it, one of the biggest things that you've noticed in that chart is that we've been sitting around 230, around the 230 range for quite some time. We've been teetering back between 225 and 230 on the National Transportation Index for quite some time. It's kind of like a stall. We had some quick surges, right? So right there in February, we had a surge where it was over 250, and we thought that, hey, you know what? It really feels like it's a true recovery. But once those volumes started to taper off and capacity stayed where it was, I mean, it really just kind of plummeted and got down into May. It started getting scary right around Memorial Day. We're talking about sub 220, which is usually right around what those operating costs operate for owner operators. So nothing really to be excited about. And then you talked about, if people don't have no money to spend, well, retailers also at the same time are saying, hey, we're not buying any more inventory. So it's not just the people, it's the retailers. And when retailers say, hey, we're not going to buy any more inventory, guess what? Those are trucks that are not going to DCs. Those are trucks that are not being put on those load boards, and that impacts our community directly.
Possibly the only bright spot that we've got to talk about in this is diesel trends, because that's the one place where we haven't seen this massive increase. Diesel's held pretty steady, if not seen some like small sequential declines pretty much this entire year. We've got news coming out of the overall oil industry, OPEC continuing to say, hey, we're not cutting production at all. It doesn't necessarily look like we're going to see a crazy jump at all moving into the winter months, when you typically see a slight increase in diesel prices as you start to see home heating and things like that tick up, particularly in the Northeast. It's maybe the one bright spot, but diesel prices don't necessarily matter if you don't have the rates to be able to sustain to run, right?
Well, I mean, you look at diesel prices, even still, we've seen them decline about 3 cents over the last week or so, but you got to remember, we've also seen them increase almost 25, 30 cents from the low of 345 they were just a few months ago. And, you add an extra 30 cents of cost, or 30 cents per mile of operational costs to anybody, and that's going to impact them. So, per gallon, not per mile, per gallon. We're talking about 35 extra cents per gallon in terms of what it's cost you to do that same run from Chicago to Minnesota. It impacts you. So you're going to have those pockets of like the Northeast and the Californias and those places like that where you're going to spend more money on diesel fuel. But like you said, the hope is that we start seeing a decline in diesel fuel at least.
All right, so you're on the interstate, pull off at a truck stop, hit your Loves, hit your TA, hit your BP. I don't know what your truck stop is of choice, right? Okay, you pull off the interstate. You're sitting there. You go to 10 trucks. You pull 10 drivers. You ask them, okay, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, how you feel about the month of August and your expectations for the rest of the year. How many of them give you a thumbs up? How many of them give you a thumbs down?
1 thumb up, 9 thumbs down. That would be my guess. Will also depend too if it's company drivers or owner operators, because some of the company drivers out here are not feeling the same things. So some of those are shielded from the market conditions that we're seeing.
Caveat the question then.
All right,
just our small
okay.
fleets are owner ops. Those are the people that matter in this space, right? I feel like 10 out of 10 is like at least middle or down.
I agree, but I think that there's still pockets, right? So you still have some niche pockets, depending on where that truck stop is. If that truck stop's in West Texas and you've got guys that are hauling on the oil fields that might be saying something differently. But to your point, the large majority are going to give you the mid to the thumbs down.
Yeah, it's been a tough road, and I don't necessarily think that we've got easy sledding ahead. Let's move on to our second topic here. The used truck market kind of feeds into how we're feeling about the rest of the industry as well. It's kind of a pretty good indicator, right? If new truck sales are doing well, we can say that we're pretty good in the market. If used truck sales are doing well, maybe we're, not quite seeing as much equipment turnover. Used truck sales are up 29%, but new entrants aren't the ones driving it. You talked about this on the playbook a couple weeks ago, and let's break this down just a little bit. Why are we seeing more used trucks entering the market? You mentioned it's not necessarily the new entrants. What does this mean? Are we seeing now our mega fleets, our big folks snapping up all the used truck inventory?
I see consolidation from mid-sized fleet owners, not your typical small guys, not your typical one truck, two truck operators, but the ones that, maybe have 5, 10 trucks, maybe 10 plus trucks, not on your mega size, because obviously your mega carriers operate in a different buying place. But within that particular environment, what you're finding this time of the year, or this time, when you look at this time of the year, and then include that this type of market that we're in, used trucks are a lot cheaper now. So if you're in a position where you can actually scale, and that's the reason why when we go out and we put articles out within a playbook, we have to address both sides, right? We got to address the sides that are folks that, hey, they might be in one circumstance, but then we also got to address the side for those that do want to scale, because there are those opportunities. There's a lot more fleets that are downscaling. So that means there's more used inventory that's actually making it to these used truck lots. So now, with that much inventory on there and you're seeing used truck price, it's a good prime time to buy if you're in that position to buy. So what we're seeing is a little bit of consolidation. You're seeing those 15 truck fleets that maybe say, hey, I'm going to add 5 more trucks. What we're not seeing in relation to that is your one truck operator saying, okay, yeah, it's time for me to buy my next truck. So that's the reason why, used truck sales are surging, but they're surging in pockets, and it's definitely not coming from the new entrants, because if you saw the new entrant data, they're not crashing into the environment anymore like they were a couple of years ago.
Okay, I'm going to throw you a curveball question here, because I think that it's interesting when you look at it in the scope of new versus used truck sales. I also think it's really interesting when you look at the scope of alternative fuel vehicles versus diesel vehicles. Obviously, when President Biden was in office a year ago, there was still this really kind of forward-looking agenda for clean trucking as a whole, and you saw a lot of these bigger fleets starting to take preparations when it came to making sure that their equipment was going to hit environmental standards in the next 5 to 10 years. Enter the Trump administration, a lot of those rules have been rolled back or have now been challenged in court to the point where they're not taking effect. The Advanced Clean Fleets rule in California, the Advanced Clean Trucks Act in California have all been challenged to the point now where they don't necessarily have to be rolled back. You've seen the Clean Fleets Partnership or Clean Trucking Alliance that took hold in Nebraska. Attorneys General have now rolled that back and said, hey, this doesn't actually matter anymore. How much is that going to impact the market now from these fleets and these carriers who are really preparing to have to see a big equipment shift, possibly dumping a lot of their older models that didn't comply with these environmental standards into the used market for cheap, which could have been picked up by these smaller groups? Now we don't necessarily have that requirement. What does that change in the sales market overall?
Well, I think what it's going to do is going to provide you with additional inventory. So when you have that much more inventory, it could potentially, I'm not going to put a crystal ball out here now, but it could potentially lower the cost of your non-compliant equipment. Now, one thing I will say is part of that curveball is to see how far they roll back anything that's current. Right, so if you have any type of current things where you can take and get a modification done, it could be one of those things where we might be looking down the barrel of a modification change where, they've already came out with something where they were saying, hey, you know what, with the D rates, we're going to put something in place to affect that. So I think that ultimately what it could do potentially for the used truck marketplace, and it's something that we have to see, and depends on what way, at what level that they go with this. I mean, we can find ourselves in a pocket where we have an excessive amount of used trucks, especially. I mean, you know what, Kaylee? Honestly, we got to look at quarter 4, right? Because we haven't seen the massive exits of overall capacity that I would say that I hate to say this because this is doesn't sound right with me saying it, but when you look at the overall capacity we have in the marketplace now, it's too much.
Yeah.
It's just too much. And depending on, these ELP, the all of that good stuff, there may be a mass exit. Yeah. And if there is a max exit and this inventory has to go back, we're talking about banks, having to take losses on assets. We're talking about dealerships having to take extended amounts of inventory, and that could further drive those truck prices down. But then also that can further enhance the consolidation that we're talking about.
We're going to get to that ELP mandate here in just a little bit because it's been about 2 months now where we've actually seen it solidly in place. And I'm going to get your thoughts on if it's legit, if the data is starting to prove itself out, or if there's still maybe a little bit of refocus that the industry needs to do to address some of these problems that are systemic and deeper than what it seems. But before we get there, we're going to jump into tariffs, which has, of course, been kind of the hottest button topic. And we've seen a lot of the impacts of tariffs, not necessarily living in the policy, but in the uncertainty around what is actually happening with these tariffs. Back at the end of August 29th, the tariffs were ruled illegal by a U.S. appeals court. And that was still almost an unimpactful ruling, right? The court has given until October 14th at least before we start to see any pullback of the tariffs. And of course, since then, President Donald Trump has now pushed it up to the Supreme Court, asked for them to go ahead and take review of this. The appeals court found that the reliance on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act that President Trump has been using to impose the country-specific tariffs was not actually legit because we're not really in a legitimate national emergency. Therefore, they said, we're going to let them remain in place until October 14th to give the administration time to appeal to the Supreme Court. The problem here, again, lies in the uncertainty. If you're somebody who really relies on load planning, or if you're somebody who relies on knowing what's coming down in the next 3 to 6 months, the entire trucking industry, you do not like to live in times of uncertainty, particularly when it comes to global economic interactions. You're sitting here wondering, what does the start of 2026 look like for myself? And you can't even forecast what the end of September looks like. So you're sitting here, you're living in this uncertainty. And if you don't have the cushion to protect yourself, protect your assets, and protect your business, then you really are in a very, very precarious position. And the other part of this is that it's not just the imports, the freight that's coming in, it's also affecting the people who are here in the United States, and therefore that affects the downstream freight as well. We've got a video queued up talking about one of the impacts that's happening to our hometown farmers, which, yes, does include an impact on freight as well. Roll the tape.
Right now, we're in a very dire situation. September's upon us, harvest is starting in the deep south, and we have 0 bushels of soybeans on the books to be sold to China for this current crop that's about to come out of the field. Historically, over the last 5 years, about a third of soybean sales to China would be booked. China amounts to 25% of our total U.S. soybean crop. So that would be 8 or 9% of the whole U.S. crop would normally be on the books with China right now, and we have 0. That is alarming. The farm economy as a whole is struggling. Inflation has caused our cost of production to rise drastically on every front. Commodity prices, in particular soybeans, are down about 50% from where they were 3 years ago. And our numbers are deeply in the red. And we send this letter to President Trump because we've been talking for months about needing to have sales in place, a deal in place, a phase 2 type agreement that has purchase commitments along with a level playing field on trade with no tariffs, and we haven't had anything happen, unfortunately. And our appeal to President Trump and his administration is make soybeans a priority in any trade negotiations that are taking place. Soybeans are the #1 agriculture export to China. And in the last trade war, it was 71% of the losses that we had as American farmers. And they're critical.
Yeah, so if we look at, and we're going to divide. So I'll stay with grain and oilseeds because that's what I do day to day. But I just have to say one thing about livestock. For livestock folks, we're in good world for them right now. So I'd love to be able to have as good a world that they're having in GNO, but we just don't. And so there's just so many things, and it's really a supply story this year. When you think about across the globe, we haven't had a year where every country's almost on all 8 cylinders where we're getting full production. And that's where we are right now. It's also too a bit of a dichotomy in the US is that we're building corn stocks, but the world is not. Or it's just the opposite in soybeans where the world's building soy stocks and we're not. And so it's a very weird world, but the fact is we just have so much supply in the world that's just going to keep prices, really on the defensive.
So this is one of those things that I think is under talked about, but is honestly one of the most important things that is coming to the forefront of this argument with tariffs, right? Because we're not just talking about imports into the United States, we're talking about exports. And you heard that first farmer talking about how the U.S. is one of the biggest exporters of soybeans to China, where a 25% tariff, that harms more than just the fact that soybeans aren't going out. That harms the transportation industry here, that harms the transportation industry that's hauling the bulk loads that are bringing the fertilizer to the farms and the bulk loads of the exports and the crops out, that harms the natural materials and the raw materials that are coming in. It's the ripple effect that I think is the biggest deal. And it's interesting to talk about it in that vein of things from a farmer's perspective. I'm curious to know kind of your thoughts on that. And is this now the untalked about, unsung issue when it comes to tariffs?
I think it is. I think there's a huge undercurrent because when, you hit on something that was very, very important. You talked about the entire downstream effect. You talked about the export impact to raw good production, fertilizers, things of that nature, getting soybeans in bulk from obviously from the farms to the port or rail or however we're transporting them out to be shipped overseas. And it impacts the overall freight volumes. Again, here we go. We're going back to freight volumes. We're going to the freight volume indexes, and none of these things are helpful to that. And what this does, it creates a downstream impact on the small carrier that's going on the load board and saying, hey, you know what? Things are not changing. We're not seeing rates change. Of course not, because we're not seeing volumes change. We're not seeing anything to impact that. And there's no smoking gun that, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But what we feel that is the smoking gun that's going to magically change things, that ain't happening. That's not it. That's not it. And when you have farmers like the two guys that we just heard from, Kaylee, here's my issue with it. So, you'll see folks on X, you'll see folks on social media say, well, here's the answer. They shouldn't be selling to China. Well, yeah, okay. That's when you have a business and you make business decisions, and part of that business decision is to go into contracts with pre-purchasing agreements. It's not easy to tell somebody, say, hey, you know what, go ahead and sell that soybean to somebody else. Mm-hmm. And when you look at how that's changed, now if you look at China's biggest buyer of soybeans, it's no longer the U.S., it's Brazil. So it has shifted. So if U.S. is not supplying it, then another country is going to benefit from that relationship. Mm-hmm. And we've got to, we've got to kind of back up and take a look at the big picture. And we have to make sure that we understand that for every action that you support, you have to support the reaction to it with the same energy, because that reaction, and there's no guarantee on the backside of this thing that things are going to be hunky-dory, because what's going to happen is that, or we're going to bail the farmers out again, mm-hmm. right? And how is that going to impact inflation from that perspective? So there's a lot of uncertainties.
The unintended consequence of the tariffs, particularly on the farmers, are driving a lot of this uncertainty. And for folks who are in the transportation industry, oftentimes your crops, your harvest season, those are the most consistent lanes that you have. And your pricing fluctuations might vary a little bit depending on how many crops you get out, what the season looks like, things like that. And that's, a lot of that's out of our hands, driven by weather or things like that. But the major uncertainty being driven by this leaves a lot of folks who rely on some of those harvest season crops as part of their dedicated freight strategy for the year. It leaves them in the dark. And that's one of those things that we continue to see and talked about on social media as well. We've got this great tweet here from Dre Berry saying, I'm on dedicated lanes, but even our dedicated lanes are going to be affected by this tariffs. It's disturbing the entire global trade market. It's a horrible strategy. The government is getting money while we struggle. I don't support it. He, meaning Trump, is hurting the economy. That's one of those things that if you don't see it and you don't feel it on a day-to-day basis, you don't think about it until you're a driver who relies on harvest season for a quarter of your yearly income, and then your farmer says, hey man, I don't have any crops for you because nobody's buying. Yeah. And then you're left out in the cold. Talk to me a little bit about that uncertainty and what that means from the trickle-down effects, yeah, and how people come to realize it too little, too late.
So the crazy thing about that, Dre Berry, he's actually a Trump supporter. Big time supporter of Trump. And I'm not that it matters in this conversation, but I wanted to provide context on that particular tweet. It's okay for you to not be, all in and have, a stance on things. But what happens when these strategies come trickle down and then downstream and impact you, it's unfortunate because at that point, you've provided a certain vision. You've been given a vision like, hey, everything is going to be okay. We're going to go in and we're going to turn this thing around. And it's going to have a little burn because you remember when, this thing all started off, it was like, hey, it's going to hurt for a while, right? I think that was something that, the Trump administration, with those messages that came out during their campaign season was like, hey, it's going to hurt for a little while. And I don't think the American people understood at that moment the type of pain that we would actually be seeing. And unfortunately, and I'll say this, the crazy thing about it is that I just don't believe we've seen the worst of it all. I don't believe that we've seen the worst of it all. And especially in the trucking industry, I still don't think that we've seen the worst of it all.
How much self-inflicted pain is too much self-inflicted pain?
Yeah,
that's the question.
That's a good question.
You hit yourself in the head with a hammer a couple times. Eventually, it's going to start to hurt.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, but it's one of those things where it's it the apple or is it the orange? Like how far do you want things to go? And that's why our next topic of discussion is really going to kind of just divide it a little even further because you've got to be very, very cautious on what you're being fed. And you have to do your research for yourself. You have to think independently. And we know this. And, if you've been in trucking and transportation long enough, if you've been in the industry long enough, it is no secret that this is a supply-driven, demand-supported economy. Microeconomy, whatever you want to call it, it is driven by supply and demand. The more demand that you have, COVID, right, with the limited amount of supply equals higher rates. But when you cut that demand off and say, hey, you know what? We don't have any more soy. 30% soybean production. When you cut that off, like that's a lot of volume that's getting yanked off, even if it's in the short term, because like you said, this is harvest season. Like we look at some of the reefer numbers, and we'll look at those in a minute. Some of the reefer numbers we're seeing are, they're obviously they're not just soybean harvest. There are other things that are being driven by that commodity. But what we're seeing is such a drastic pullback in overall demand. People ain't, like we was talking about earlier, people ain't got no money. They ain't got no money. They're not spending. And that's really, really concerning. But, we hate that, the strategy on where these pre-purchase agreements that were in place for the farmers have already had pre-purchase agreements. What happens to all that waste? What happens to all that soybean that's going to waste? What's going to happen for them? And you saw it in that gentleman's eyes. I mean, they're worried. They're extremely worried.
Yeah. And the question becomes now, if you're looking, you don't pull out your crystal ball on these things, which we don't want to prognosticate. But when we're talking about what is a strategy moving forward, are you in it for the secure freight? Are you looking for more contract, or are you going to play the spot market? Do you prioritize a little bit of security, or do you prioritize a lot of flexibility? Or is it up to your own individual risk tolerance?
The problem I have right now is that the spot market has not been kind. One of the things is you look at the overall rejection rate, and rejection rate tells us how much freight is being spilled back over to the spot market. We're at 5.82 right now, meaning that 95% of the contracted freight that's being tendered over is being retained and not spilled over onto the spot market. When that number is down there, that doesn't give me any comfort to stick around on the spot market, but I don't have any opportunity if I haven't built any relationships on a contract market. What I'm going to do, just walk up to a shipper and say, hey, I'm Adam, nice to meet you. You want to give me your contracted freight right now? Which doesn't work that way. These relationships take time. You have to work to build these contracted relationships. And unfortunately, when you live by the spot market, you die by the spot market.
Yeah.
And we have seen that time and time again. We've seen it in the revocation data. We've seen it in some of the rate histories that we have. And it's honestly, it's unfortunate, but it's going to be painful in that spot market for no crystal balls, right? But I'm going to tell you right now, you don't have to be a scientist or a wizard to be able to look at the data and say, hey, you know what? I don't see a silver lining in sight.
Yeah, agreed. And it's a tough place to sit after what has been now an incredibly prolonged freight recession. And let's move on to our next topic here. If you are involved in the freight industry at all, you have seen this conversation. If you are on X at all, you've seen this conversation. If you're a watcher of Fox News or a consumer of CNN, or if you're a reader of probably your local paper, and if you are an avid peruser of the FMCSA Safer database on a regular basis, I don't know why you would be if you don't work in trucking, but you've seen this data. The conversation around English language proficiency for truckers has taken on a life of its own. It is now snowballed into this grassroots effort that has gotten the attention of federal agencies and lawmakers and state agencies and advocacy groups and the mainstream media. It's gotten to a point now where it is so ubiquitous that I can talk to my parents about it who live in Texas, and they say, yeah, we've heard this conversation around truck drivers and their ability to speak English or not. What's going on with that? Everybody knows that from a federal standpoint, the language proficiency of the American truck driver is under incredibly intense scrutiny. From a state-by-state perspective, it's also under intense scrutiny as well. Texas has decided that it's ramping up roadside English proficiency checks on drivers, both interstate and intrastate. So you're driving across Texas, you get stopped, language is going to be tested. If you're in the state of Texas and you only stay in the state of Texas, your language is going to be tested. If you are in some other states, New Mexico, Washington, California, they've been told by the federal government, hey, you're risking federal funding if you don't actively enforce these ELP mandates. But what does enforcement look like? What does recovery look like if you're a truck driver who's been stopped and you don't necessarily have the language proficiency that your specific inspector thinks is good enough? What happens after you get put out of service and then you take a spelling test and you come back on the road? Still nobody knows. The hottest topic to grace the industry probably in a couple decades. Adam, we have thoughts.
We do. So I have a lot of thoughts about this particular subject, and let me back up a little bit, Kaylee. So when the campaigns took place, and everybody had a side on what they wanted, right? And part of that campaign was to really focus heavily on illegal immigration, right? And his message was, hey, illegal immigration is taking your jobs, it's causing your housing costs to increase. So when you take that as the overarching message, now we look at the trucking industry and say, hey, there's illegal immigration here too. And that has been the smoking gun. It has, in social media, it's been labeled as the smoking gun. It's been labeled as the root cause of all of our issues, whether it be accident, whether it be rates, whether it be anything you can imagine, whether it be truck parking. All of these things tie into whether or not we have people on the road that can't speak English. I did a monologue on that. So my thoughts went 55 minutes long.
Where can people find that monologue?
You can go right here in the podcast. It was the episode 30. You can hear that monologue in episode 30. I have issues with it. I have, coming from a driver perspective, having the opportunity to see the data and being in this industry almost 3 decades, I have an issue with safety as a whole. Okay, safety as a whole within our industry has been compromised. But you know what I have an issue with more than anything else? Gaslighting. I have an issue with gaslighting more than anything else in there. And the reason why, and I'm not saying that this is particularly it. I'm just wanting you to think. Every time you have a high-profile case, it gets the media attention. It gets things going. It gets people's energies up. It gets people mad. It gets people upset. Are there illegal immigrants that are operating in trucking? Absolutely. Are there people behind the wheel of a truck that don't speak English that shouldn't? Absolutely. Is not being able to speak the English language proficiently an issue? Absolutely. My problem lies when we identify it as the smoking gun. So there's this video that popped up on social media. I want you to watch this. And behind that tweet, and every time that there's an accident, every time there's an issue, it points back to that smoking gun. There has not been a major crash since we've seen the unfortunate accidents that have taken place. There has not been a major crash or any type of content on social media like what you're watching right now without it going back to, hey, it was because of we're putting foreigners behind the wheel. Take a look at this video.
The green jacket? Excuse me. The guy who's
Come
like
this
this?
way. Excuse me, sir.
I think it's that guy right there.
The guy right there?
That's the guy right there.
Okay.
So you see that video, and obviously catastrophic devastation. You've got multiple 18-wheelers involved in this accident. You've got multiple passenger vehicles that are involved in this accident. I've seen that video on social media. I don't particularly know the exact crash that it was linked to. I can't look at that and say that there was a causation. I can't look at that and say it was the truck driver's fault, or if it was the F-150's fault, or that was a Dodge Ram that was in there. If it was the Ram's fault, or if it was the silver passenger car. You don't know. Aren't able to pick out the nuance of what happened in that accident just by seeing the video. And in my personal opinion, most of this conversation that's going on right now around the industry lacks that important nuance. And you're jumping to conclusions from an entire industry perspective without understanding the root cause of what's going on. That's what you and I and our team have been fighting for to talk about, is to bring that nuance back into this conversation and understand that, yes, you might have a correlation between one or two or three things. Yes, maybe your driver has an HB1 visa and they were trained in a 2-day CDL school, but is the problem the fact that they're an HB1 visa driver, or is it the fact that they got their CDL in 2 days from an online service and then they were able to purchase an MC number off of Facebook Marketplace? Where does the actual problem lie here, and are we attacking the real root cause? Can we have these conversations in a nuanced capacity where it's not just the fact that this person was an immigrant to the United States, it's the fact that they entered a system that was delivered with a promise of a rewarding career and a fulfilling life and things that could actually deliver them some type of reward and fulfillment, but they were dropped into a system that was set up to make them fail by not delivering them the tools that they actively needed to be successful. That's the type of nuance that we lack in a lot of the conversation that's going on here, and it leads to this conversation that turns into something different than what it actually should be. I could go on a monologue about it for not quite probably 55 minutes, but I could probably get close.
Here's the issue, and like you said, we can go into a monologue and really kind of dive into the root cause, and really kind of dig into the issue. But I think that the biggest problem I have with it, Kaylee, is that, do you really believe that if we remove all, right now, magic crystal ball, and I say, hey, Kaylee, you can remove every single ELP, questionable, H-1B, questionable, and let's just talk for real. Mm-hmm. Let's just talk real. You have the power to remove it all at the drop of a hat. It goes away. Does it change the market?
From what perspective?
I'll do a two-sided approach. Will our highways instantly become that much safer?
Not necessarily.
Why?
Correlation is not equal causation in this effect. Just because someone does not speak a language that is up to your particular standard, an individual's particular standard, does not mean that they are inherently unsafe. When you, an American, go over to, I'm going to say the UK, but our language is the same, but they drive on the opposite side of the road. When you, as an American, visit a foreign country, a language that you don't speak it, you naturally assimilate and assume that everybody will have some type of English language understanding for you. If you go to Germany and you drive on their Autobahn, are you being tested to see how much you understand German? No.
But here's the thing.
But are you inherently unsafe because you don't speak the language.
I'm with you, but I'm going to play devil's advocate because I really want to have this conversation. Throw 80,000 pounds involved. Does it change the dynamic? Absolutely.
But is it a failure of language or is it a failure of training?
I think it's a failure of the system from the top.
I would agree with that. And I also think that it's a failure of accountability.
And accountability.
I think it's a failure of personal accountability more than it is a failure of systemic accountability. It's a failure of systemic training and a failure of personal accountability. That becomes the point where you get the real rubber meeting the road of the problem, the root issue. But that's not necessarily specific to who you are as a person. I'm a US born citizen. If I was not accountable to myself and didn't hold myself to safety standards, just because I'm a US citizen and I speak perfect English doesn't necessarily mean that without that personal accountability, you should trust me.
I think that's a great point because at the end of the day, too, I mean, realistically, like when you look back before 2016, when, this ELP's been around forever. So like, don't get it twisted. Now, just don't think that, Trump came in and it was like, no more of this. It's been around for a long time, since like 1937, I think. And 16 is when it was saying, hey, you know what? It's no longer an out of service. Okay. Before 16, when it was still an out of service, we were still having 5,000 fatalities every single year. So my issue goes back to, like you said, the causation of it. And I get it. It's easily the subject that we can attack because it's, hey, that's what they campaigned on. Get mad over this. Like, they're taking your jobs. Hey, Kaylee, they're here to take your jobs. And that's easy to get mad over that. But then when you sprinkle in and just, like, think a little bit. And what bothers me more than anything is like, listen, I'm a minority. You know what I'm saying? And not saying that it matters, it shouldn't. When you go and you see on social media these days now, I woke up this morning, I'm looking at Twitter, right, or X, whatever you want to call it, and this picture of this woman took a picture of a lady in a bathroom with her 2 kids. And she said, look, this is what our truck stops in America has come to. And the lady was washing her kids' feet in the sink. But she took a picture in the bathroom. That's where we at. That's against the law. And then you think about, like, anytime you see a truck or at a truck stop with a turban on, like, it's automatic. Like, hey, they're taking our jobs. I'm an athlete, so I'm a competitor. I'm gonna compete. You know what I mean? I don't care. Like, I want to compete. As a business owner, it's a contact sport. If you're here illegally and you're breaking the laws, then absolutely you should be held accountable. The problem I have is with the prejudice. And the problem I have is thinking that every person that wears a turban or every person that might speak with broken English doesn't belong behind the wheel of a truck or doesn't belong here. There are standards that we have in place. Absolutely. You need to be able to read the language. You need to be able to read the sign that says, 12-6 bridge. But the crazy thing about it is that every time you see a picture on social media with a truck going under a 12-6 bridge or whatever, must have been a non-domicile CDL. That's it. That's who did it. And that's my problem.
This is a take that the internet is going to flame me for and throw it on me. I don't care. I believe it is truly inherently lazy to blame the problems for the trucking industry the way that we're doing it right now. I think it's inherently lazy to point fingers at the root cause without going forward and addressing the broader issues. I think it's inherently lazy to say this is the reason for all of the problems that we're seeing in the industry as a whole. I think that there are people who have now taken steps forward and looked at the bigger picture and said, okay, now we need to address the training issue. We need to address the issue of multiple MC numbers being registered in places that shouldn't exist. And we're seeing folks who are actually pushing for big time growth and accountability from the industry as a whole. They're starting to push into this space where they're talking about these 1 day, 2 day, 3 day CDL schools need to be looked at and assessed, and they're moving the needle forward. But from an industry perspective, a commentary perspective as a whole, there are more people who are continuing to take the lazy route of talking about this issue and doing it because they feel empowered to do so. And you mentioned the picture on the internet. That is one of the biggest problems facing it too, is that people feel empowered now to make these statements and to come out and to make overreaching generalizations about groups of people. And they feel the support from the crowd behind them, and it's empowering, but all you're doing is adding negativity to the conversation instead of looking forward and saying, okay, here's the problem, how do we fix it? Pointing out a problem without offering a solution does nothing except perpetuate the narrative of getting us stuck in this negative place. What happens next? You're not able to answer it unless you sit down and do the hard work.
And we're not
off the soapbox.
But we're not addressing the real issues. Like, you know, I think that, and part of that is that tweet from the DOT. That flamed me, because they listed out, and what you see on your screen right now is that these are the things that we've accomplished, right? This is the things that we've accomplished, and these are the things that we've been focused on. This is September, right?
Yep.
These are the things that we've accomplished. And it lists out the 3 states that are under perjury for what they've done. But you know what's the crazy thing about that, Kaylee, is? New Mexico, California, Washington State. It went on, Secretary Duffy went on and was like, yeah, we did a thorough investigation and we found that these 3 states were the ones that were the culprits. But if you go back and look at the reports, Florida, the state of Florida, where the accident took place, had 1 English language proficiency out of service between June 25th to August the 16th. But like you said, it doesn't fit the narrative, because those 3 states, of course California, because you know that California and the governor of California, there's a big back and forth between the governor of California and the president of the United States. So anytime that I got an opportunity to go ahead and throw a dig, I'm going to grab it and I'm going to go for it.
Hold on, it's the laziness.
It's the laziness.
It's the laziness.
But you know what it reminds you of? It reminds you of back, you remember back in the day when they would have like I think it was Home Alone or one of those movies where somebody went in, they robbed him. It's like, who was it? It was that guy. And they picked the wrong guy, and then meanwhile, everybody else behind you is like tearing up the place. There are so many issues. There's people dying on the roads. You can literally get an MC number in 30 days with just $300.
You can get an MC number in 30 minutes off Facebook Marketplace.
Or you could do that. And the thing about that is that there's a lot of issues, but the issues that from the top, the most important issue from the top, and we want you to think is the most important issues, is those 3 damn states. We want you to focus on that and say, yeah, that's your problem. Meanwhile, we're going to push off, not that I have a position, and I do have a position on it, but we're going to push off broker transparency. We won't talk about that until 2026.
Yep.
We're not going to talk about the fact that the need of auditing these carriers that we have in a database that they promise that we're going to say, hey, we're going to go to a binary system. It's no longer going to be, unrated, conditional, no rating. We're going to say either you're safe or you're bad. That's no longer an issue, because we've got 3 states that fit your narrative, and we're going to get you behind it.
We're not going to talk about the fact that we have a microscope now on the American trucking industry, but the FMCSA continues to be understaffed and underfunded.
Yep.
We're not going to talk about the fact that you have infrastructure projects that were funded by a bipartisan legislation 2 years ago that are now being underfunded, outbid, that contribute to the unsafe practices on the road. If you don't have a safe place to drive, how can you be a safe driver? We're not going to talk about that because it's not impactful to the continuing narrative. And we can go on this for an hour. We could go for another 2 hours, but we have to get ready to wrap this up. And we were going to talk about 30-second rants. I think that we got over those 30-second rants, and we gotta keep moving forward.
Yeah.
So Adam, let's wrap it up. Let's go final drive. Quick hits forecast. What are you looking at coming in September? We're already about 2 weeks through the month. At this point in time, we should have been starting to see a pull forward in imports, people getting ready for peak season. Like we mentioned at the top, we're struggling, like it or not, if it's official recession or not. Everybody knows that prices are high. People are looking at budgeting for their 2025 holiday spending. The back to school season is closed off now. We won't have retail data for probably about another 3 weeks or so. But when that retail data comes out, I think that we're in for a world of hurt to actually understand what's going on. From a broader perspective, jobs report for the month of August was not great. Things continue to hurt us from an overall economic perspective, but what does the rest of the year look like as we move into Q4?
More of the same. You know, when you look at job data, you know, when you look at then it's really important because I did a story on cardboards and pallets, and there was an extreme pullback of seeing the usage and the distribution and production of cardboard and pallets, and that usually is a key indicator, which is one of those underserved key indicator from the financial industry when it comes down to looking at that. But I think when you talk about the last part of the year, I see more of the same. I see that unless there's a massive event, a la COVID, which, you know, God forbid anything like that takes place. But unless there's a massive event, I see a lot more pain than I see anything on the bright side for the remainder of the year. And I just hope I'm wrong.
I hope you're wrong as well. And I think it's going to be interesting to watch. We'll, of course, take a look at earnings that come out here in about 4 weeks or so for Q3. From an overall perspective, things are still not looking good. The U.S. maritime shipping industry as a whole, container shipping industry, reported their second quarter earnings down 56% from quarter to quarter, 64% year over year. And that's just an aggregate average of the entire American container shipping industry. But 64% is not good on a year-over-year basis, particularly considering when 2024 was still not a great year for container shipping as a whole. It's going to be something that we continue to watch. Adam, I've loved doing this. This was awesome. I think that we should do it more often. There's so much to talk about in the industry. Go ahead, wrap us up, throw people where they need to go.
I appreciate that. And that's a wrap for today's long haul. And this was a fun one. Big thanks to my co-host, Kaylee Nix, for jumping in the cab and riding shotgun through these topics because they were tough today. And we wanted to throw a little curveball. If you got any value out of today's show, whether it made you think, made you laugh, it probably made you mad, and that's all good. But do us a favor, like it, share it, and subscribe wherever you're listening. And don't forget to hit up freightwaves.com/playbook and subscribe to the Playbook newsletter where we break it down for small carriers every single week with market trends, tips, and tools that you can actually use. This is the long haul where the real ones tune in. Until next time, stay tuned, stay ready.